First tonight to the power of Africa's youth. We saw an example of that in the recent humbling of the president of Kenya, William Ruto, one of Africa's most internationally regarded leaders, brought to heel by young people. The genie of their public fury was let out of the bottle, and Mr. Ruto was forced to abandon his flagship policy and introduce a new program of public austerity. He's also started to reach out directly to Kenya's youth, promising to engage and listen to them. It's been described as a milestone moment in a continent with the youngest population on earth, where almost 3/4 of the citizens are under 35, but where their voices are rarely heard. To what extent does that fire that Kenyans' youth sparked in their country resonate across the continent, including here in Nigeria? Can it be seen as proof that with enough determination, Africa's youth can force their leaders to hear their voices? Well, from all this, I'm joined now in the studio by the African Union's youth envoy, Chido Cleopatra Mpemba, who's on a visit to Nigeria and has been meeting Femi Gbajabiamila, the Chief of Staff to President Tinubu, and Dr. Jamila Ibrahim, the Minister of Youth and Sports Development. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start by, well, welcome to Nigeria. Although you've been here a couple of days or so, haven't you?
Oh yes, I arrived on Monday, so it's been quite a couple of days. Sad to be leaving tomorrow already.
Oh well, so we're lucky to have grabbed you tonight then, eh?
Yes.
So tell us more about what you do as the African Union's Special Youth Envoy. Presumably, that gives you a position on the decision-making table of the African Union.
Okay, well, firstly, thank you for having me. And in terms of my role as the African Union Youth Envoy, this is actually a decision that came from the member states from across Africa when they decided that we need to have more young people in the decision-making table. So I sit under the cabinet of the chairperson of the African Union, His Excellency Musa Faki Mohammed. And my role really is to ensure that we advocate for young people's voices at the decision-making table. I also represent young people within the AU statutory meetings. We have one actually coming up next week. And I advocate for the African Union Youth Charter. Now, with the African Union Youth Charter, I mean, this is a decision, again, that came from our African member states in 2006 in Banjul, where Nigeria is actually one of the member states that have signed and ratified the Youth Charter. Whilst we still have 10 more countries that are yet to sign and to ratify, and that's also part of my role, to advocate and to lobby for more member states to sign on it, but also to ensure what's within the Youth Charter is being implemented continent-wide and within the national youth policies.
And you're originally from Zimbabwe.
I'm originally from Zimbabwe.
Did you have to fend off a lot of competition to get the job, as it were?
There was quite a lot of competition. I mean, as you know, with the African Union, we try to be fair. So, you know, it has to rotate per region.
Right.
So the first youth envoy was from North Africa. I'm from Southern Africa. I'm getting to the end of my term, given that the chairperson is concluding his term. So it's yet to go to the rest of the other regions. But in terms of, you know, the competition, a number of member states actually nominated young people for this role and, you know, got nominations from their ministries of youth. But they also uniquely made it open to the public, unlike the other special envoys, because the rest of the special envoys are, you know, mostly former ministers working within their home countries, but I'm embedded directly within the African Union. So they also try to make it wide, and they advertise for young people to get the opportunity to apply. I actually applied through the public link onto the website and went through the entire process and the voting within our regional economic communities. And, you know, at the end of it was told that I had been
That's
selected.
quite remarkable, really, isn't it?
Thank you. It's such a privilege and honor, but also a huge responsibility, you can imagine, with the largest demographic we have on the continent.
Right. Well, let's get to the knob of what you've had to do in the period that you've been in the position. I imagine, for instance, that the recent protests in Kenya would constitute part of what you would present to the African Union as what young people are saying on the continent.
Definitely, I think it's very important that to include more young people as part of our decision making, even when it comes to electoral governance and processes. It's very, very crucial. Just recently, one of the things that I've advocated for is to have more young people's participation in the electoral processes. As we all know that this year is a big election year for Africa. I just came from South Africa, where I actually joined on the ground as part of election observers and also reporting back. But most importantly, I think it goes beyond observing and understanding and appreciating the electoral processes. It's also about having young people on the table and on the ballot paper. And I was quite impressed. And I'm giving South Africa as an example because that's where I've just previously, observed the elections last month, with a number of young people coming to the forefront on the table as MPs that have been selected. I think the youngest MP is like 24 years old. And not to withstand that, even just, in Nigeria, with the decision to have youth and young women's representation at 30% in government positions, I think that's big, because at the end of the day, that's what young people want. We do not want decisions made for us. We want to also be on the table and be able to contribute towards the decisions that will, affect our future. Again, because we're the largest demographic, I always say this, and, to say that as the largest demographic, it means whatever happens, be it in any, space that we enter, we are the largest demographic. We have the largest market share in anything. 65% is a huge number. So it means that when decisions are made, they're going to affect us the most. And if, be it a product or service, if we're going to put it towards economic development, it's going towards us as the largest demographic.
And of course, what happened in Kenya was to say, look, you're not listening to us, and if you don't listen, this could happen. I mean, did they suddenly come rushing to your table and saying, okay, what do you want us to do, sort of thing? I mean, the members of the AU and the rest of it, because that was a warning sign, wasn't it?
Yes, and I think, we've seen this uprising actually with a lot of young people, taking matters in their own hands. Of course, we encourage everything to be peaceful. I believe in intergenerational co-leadership and, us having to resolve matters in a peaceful manner.
Well, in fairness to the youth, I mean, there was a peaceful protest before the police then came out.
From the youth side, of course, we've seen that, but I believe peace goes in both ways. It's not just young people. When you talk about peace, it's every citizen, it's the government, making sure that they have an environment that's conducive and peaceful towards young people. So again, with that, they came on the table with their demands, but then with what was, how it was received, it had to be received in a way, in a manner that's also peaceful back towards what they'd put on the table.
So you commend President Ruto for the way he's responded, because I mean, after the initial sort of police brutality, he immediately stepped back from all that and extended a hand of friendship, if you like.
Yes, and I know recently they had a Twitter space, an X, now called X, where he was engaging with young people, and young people also got to contribute on what they want to see change and done better. At the same time, I believe that's not enough. For me, I always say that concrete actions, less speeches and more concrete action. It was a dialogue and commitments were made, but we first have to see that being put into action to get to a point of, commending.
Right. Yeah. And of course, you are here in Nigeria. You paid a courtesy visit on the Chief of Staff to the President, Femi Gbajabiamila, as well as the Minister of Youth and Sports Development, Dr. Jamila Ibrahim. What was the focus of your discussions with them?
Okay, sure. So I actually met as well with the Minister of State on Youth Development, Engineer Ayo, and with the Chief of Staff as well. And I think the focus, first of all, was also commending the efforts that Nigeria has made in the 30%, decision of youth and young women's representation. But not only that, I believe that as Africa, we also need to look at these best practices. So we're also discussing in terms of how that can also be used to advocate the rest of the member states within the African Union. Secondly, what we also discussed was an institutionalization of the Office of the Youth Envoy. I mean, I'm almost coming to the end of my term, and I was appointed under the current chairperson. But what it means is if the role is not institutionalized, a new chairperson can come and decide that they do not need to appoint a youth envoy.
So you're lobbying
so I'm lobbying to get that through our member states. In the upcoming AU summit next week, there's actually going to be presented, it's going to be one of the items that's presented on the agenda for member states to support and to see if it can be institutionalized. What it means is after I leave, at least we know that whoever comes into that position of a chairperson or chairwoman 10 years down the line, there would be a position for a special envoy on youth and for that continuation and sustainability beyond the person and beyond me.
And you mentioned that you discussed the recent decision to include 30% representation of youth and young women in government positions. I mean, what is your reaction to that? Is that something you consider a positive move? Is it enough?
I believe it's a positive move. It's a good start. Initially, in fact, there's a lot of lobbying that has happened with young people, specifically within my office. For instance, we established an African Union Youth Reference Committee. And interesting enough, the chair of our subcommittee on governance, youth, peace and security, Chimdi, is based in Nigeria and, was
Well, the name sounds Nigeria.
Yes. Chimdi, and, she's one of the young professionals and leaders that has been advocating. So it was very good to see that through this advocacy and this lobbying that has happened with the young people and the Youth Reference Committee, we've seen this positive move. I believe it's a good start. I mean, of course, if we had a choice, we'd say 100%, but we also believe in intergenerational co-leadership and learning from what has come before us and also what we're not going to take forward from and
obviously some would say that you need to build up experience over time.
Yes, and that's also quite controversial because we get that quite a lot as young people, even in the spaces that I get into. And as much as I'm a member of the cabinet of the chairperson, but you find in some spaces that comes out a lot to say, but you don't have the same years of experience, in terms of what someone else has experienced. But I believe it's not just about the years of experience. It's about how you bring innovation to the table. It's about, even as a young person, we've had to be resilient because of the challenges that we've faced and, trying to fight the challenges that have been faced by our forefathers. That doesn't necessarily come with experience. It comes to, getting to see what is around you at the moment in time, and also comes in how you respond in an innovative manner based on the environment that's around you. I said that in such a riddle as a politician, but then in short, I think it's just for me and a passion just to see more young people being given spaces and this issue of experience not being used as an excuse.
I think that's a very intelligent response that you've given there. And beyond speaking to sort of government officials in Nigeria, have you also been talking to youth groups in this country and listening to their concerns and demands and what emerged from that?
Yes, definitely. In fact, maybe I'll start off with my listening tour. I mean, as I mentioned, when I got into office, I thought it was important that if I'm going to represent young people in the decision-making table, it should be based on what they want and what they say. And when I came to Abuja for the first time, I actually visited marginalized communities as well. I went to Akudi district, for instance, where I met with young, young people that were embarking in peer-to-peer learning as a result of COVID-19 and trying to see how they can still continue their education. And I'm just using that specifically as an example of, the importance of also engaging with communities. And as much as with youth organizations, we have some that are within marginalized communities that don't necessarily have the opportunity and a chance to be able to have these discussions with the African Union. Now, when it comes to youth leaders as well, we have so many groups, that I've had the privilege to meet within my visit here in Nigeria, individuals that are doing amazing things, but in terms of groups, for instance, we have the Association of the Mandela Washington Fellows. We have the Global Shapers Hub, here in Abuja that I've met with, but we also have, young women representing Parliament as well. And, just to name a few of, some of the groups and the people that I've met with, in addition to the local communities and the marginalized.
Well, that's impressive. And beyond sort of appointments, we talked about the 30% allocation, if you like. I expect there is also the desire to create more opportunities for them to get into elected offices and thus gain more political power. What's your assessment of how that is progressing in Nigeria, for example?
I think it's quite interesting, especially even with the ministers that I've met, that they're young. and some members of parliament as well are young. And I think it's important, in as much as, would create these opportunities for young people, we also capacitate them for these opportunities. I'll give an example that might not be directly related to Nigeria, but I remember vividly in Zimbabwe, actually, when we had elections last year. And I'd received a lot of feedback from young people that wanted to actually run for office, but they could not afford the fees, the election, the nomination fees that are required. And I think within that dynamic, we should also consider in any country to say, within the political space, is it conducive for young people? What can we do better? In addition to the quotas, in addition to say we're opening up the space, but is it conducive enough for them to be able to penetrate the spaces too?
Well, that's interesting because, the reason I say that is that Nigeria, of course, and indeed the continent of Africa, is made up of young people in the majority.
True.
But is their priority getting political appointments and elected offices for the few, or would they be much more interested in employment opportunities, for example, for the many, in a continent with staggeringly high levels of youth unemployment and as a result, youth poverty? I'm wondering what to them is a priority.
Well, based on my conversations as well, I'd say that it's a balance of all. You need young people in employment to innovate what's already available. You also need young people in political positions and government positions to influence decision making. But we also need young people creating the jobs. Entrepreneurship is very key. And what I've actually seen within Nigeria is it's very vibrant with young people in entrepreneurship. Not only when I've been in Nigeria, but in different platforms that I'm in, be it globally on global platforms or even across the African continent. You always have Nigerians, doing amazing innovative work and entrepreneurship that's also providing employment to others. So I believe we do need a balance of all three.
But why do you think there's such huge youth unemployment in a country like Nigeria, for example, which is a reasonably well-off country?
We should take this back to education. And I'm also saying this because that's the African Union theme of the year. And, with me being in Nigeria, I'd actually come for the Mastercard Foundation EdTech conference that's also being hosted in partnership with the government. And the reason I say this is because when you look at the root cause of high unemployment, one of the causes is mismatch of skills. We have a lot of graduates, I think over 80 million graduates each year, but only about 20 million are able to get jobs. Reason being of the mismatch of skills. So we need to address that from the education system. How do we ensure that our education system is current and is quality education that can meet the demands of the current market? I think that's very key. And even when you look at that, for instance, then it means that not everyone is necessarily going to look for jobs. They are creators of jobs. How do we ensure we have entrepreneurial skills for young people so that they can also contribute to the economic development of Nigeria and even the ones that are not, in Nigeria? And that comes within the entrepreneurship skills. But again, that's not enough. Young people need access to funding and financing. That has come out a lot. So interesting enough, I was a banker before, getting into this role. And you find that even within the banking space, young people are seen to be not bankable, or even when they have business ideas, they seem to be a high risk. So we also need to look at how do we mitigate that risk, where we double providing them with access to financing, but also the mentorship that they need for it. And I'll give an example of the African Development Bank, for example. Just 2 years ago, when they made an announcement at the African Union Summit that they were actually going to start youth entrepreneurial banks. And these youth entrepreneurial banks will be led and run by young people, and also looking at how they can provide funding and financing to young people at a lower rate, and also make sure that they just have opportunities to that funding and financing. And I believe at the moment they've since opened one in Liberia. It should be Liberia. I'll just double check that, but I know definitely it should be Liberia that they've managed to actually start on that, and they look to expand, across the continent. So again, these are examples of how we can contribute towards the issue of high unemployment, but looking at the root cause being on education as well.
Well, you've impressed me, and I will certainly vote for the, if there is any voting, for the African Union to make the position more permanent. Thank you very much indeed for coming in, and I wish you all the very best. And I think what you're doing is very impressive, and keep at it.
Thank you.
And Chido Cleopatra Mpemba is the African Union Special Youth Envoy, and she's on a visit to Nigeria. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you for having me.